When it comes to logic, few dogs are as brilliant as my dog Marlowe. Be like Marlowe and be sure to hit like and subscribe. Woof. As a fan of the great detectives in history, I am sure that you are, like me, familiar with the famous case of the dog that did not bark. Wait, am I hearing correctly? Are some of you not familiar with the dog that did not bark? Well, that is a shame, for it is truly a ripplingly good tale. I will tell you about it, because it is a story that every good logic detective should know. And I want you to become good logic detectives. The dog that did not bark is found in a story about the great logical detective Sherlock Holmes. It seems that a famous racehorse named Silver Blaze was stolen, and the horse's trainer was killed during the night. Now, you may well think that a good watchdog would create a racket if some thief came into a stable to steal a horse. And if you do think this, I commend you for your astute insight. The clue that tipped off Holmes as to the malefactor was precisely the fact that the dog did not bark. From this slender clue, which everyone else in the story missed, Sherlock Holmes inferred that it likely was the case that the dog knew the intruder well. Holmes's induction turned out to be correct, but I will say no more about the story, for I would not care to spoil it for you. Yes, I said induction. I am glad that you caught that. Holmes's inference about the culprit was an induction. It was only a probabilistic inference. You may not know this, but Sherlock Holmes never said the phrase often attributed to him, that a given inference was a brilliant deduction. Holmes never said it because nearly all of his inferences about who was guilty of which crime were only probabilistic. That is, they were almost all inductions. But I am getting distracted, so let me get back on track. What can we take from the story of the dog that did not bark that will help us in our investigations as detectives of logic? Well, one thing is that often what matters most is what is not said. In logic, what is not said will either be a premise or a conclusion. And it turns out that human beings often do not state their arguments fully, and often leave premises, conclusions, or even both premises and conclusions unstated. Now, you know what I am going to say next, do you not? Yep. I am going to say that we need a technical term to describe arguments that have missing pieces. We will call such arguments enthymematic. What? You do not like that word? It is a very good word, my skeptical friend. It rolls off the tongue as easily as the phrase four-horse accumulator. I will say, however, that enthymematic arguments are a lot more common than a successful four-horse accumulator, which are in fact quite uncommon. Enthymematic arguments are in fact far more common than that. They are so common that one might sometimes believe that they are the rule rather than the exception. So, just so you have it fixed firmly in your head, I want you to remember that an enthymematic argument is any argument that is missing any piece whatsoever. An argument missing a premise is enthymematic. Likewise, an argument missing two premises is also enthymematic. An argument missing a conclusion is enthymematic as well. And an argument missing one or more premises and the conclusion is also enthymematic. Have you now got the term fixed firmly in your gray matter? Good. Remember this as well. An enthymematic argument is called an enthymeme. This term, enthymeme, is very old. It was first used in our sense of the term by the ancient Greek philosopher and logician Aristotle, whom we have already met in an earlier video. It comes from the Greek word enthymema, which means thought or argument or piece of reasoning. I like that latter derivation because an enthymeme is literally a piece of reasoning, because something has been left out and it is incomplete. This etymology tells you that people have been presenting enthymematic arguments for a very long time indeed. And at least since the time of Aristotle, we have known that we need to do something about it. Why do we need to do something about it? You ask the best questions, my insightful junior detective. We need to do something about it because when a part is left out, it might cause us to think that a bad argument is good. It is like leaving some ingredients off of a food label. You may look at the label and conclude that the food will be good food. But what if the manufacturer left some ingredients off the label that you do not like? You would be sorry indeed when dinner time rolled around. But I know from past experience that at this point, you are demanding examples, because it is easier to understand things about this logic business if we have examples in front of us. Let me therefore start with a famous line from Shakespeare. I bet that you did not know that Shakespeare was trained in logic, did you? He was indeed very well trained in the Aristotelian logic that was a common part of schooling at the time, and his plays contain many bits of logic, most of them enthymetic. I think he may have done this for effect, but I do not know, for I am a logician and not a scholar of the bard. Anyway, here is a short argument from Act 3, Scene 3 of his play called Henry VI, Part 2. Forbear to judge, for we are sinners all. Now tell me that this does not sound wise. Tell me that this is not poetic. But as a logic detective, you should feel a tug at your sleeve. Why? Because something is missing. What is the connection between being sinners and not judging? Do you see it now? There must be an unstated premise that connects the given premise to the conclusion. I will now fill in the missing premise for you. We are all sinners. Sinners should not judge. This is the missing premise. Therefore, we should not judge. Now the structure is clear, and now we can see that the argument is indeed a valid deductive argument, because if the premises are true, the conclusion must be true. Is this argument also sound? That is, are the two premises true? I will leave that for you to decide, but notice that if it is true that we are all sinners and it is true that sinners should not judge, then it would follow with necessity that we should not judge. So it is valid and may be sound if all of the premises are true. Now notice what we had to do to make the argument work. We had to supply the missing piece. Why? Because this argument is enthymetic. Do you think that Shakespeare was aware of this fact? I believe he was. Shakespeare was no dummy and would have made an excellent logic detective if he had not been distracted by all of his playwriting. Now let me give you an example that does not turn out so well. It is an argument that I have commonly heard about gun control. Here it is. Guns are used to hurt people. Therefore, guns ought to be illegal. At first glance, it sounds persuasive, but something is off. There is a gap. The premise does not connect to the conclusion. It is in fact enthymetic, because it is missing a premise. So how can we fill in that gap? Here is one possible way of filling in the missing premise. Guns are used to hurt people. Things that are used to hurt people ought to be illegal. This is our first guess at the missing premise. Therefore, guns ought to be illegal. Now, if this really is the full argument, you can see immediately that it is valid. Because if it is true that guns are used to hurt people, and it is also true that things that are used to hurt people ought to be illegal, then it would follow necessarily that guns ought to be illegal. The next question then would be whether it is a sound argument. That is, are all of the premises true? And I think you can see that many citizens would object to the second premise. Is it true that all things that are used to hurt people ought to be illegal? Should we outlaw rocks, knives, insults, and harsh words? I will leave that question for your consideration. And now, my friend, we must again consider an important question. Why do I say that enthymemes are dangerous? Your brain is very good at filling in missing pieces. Too good. It does it automatically, without asking permission, without checking whether the missing premise is reasonable. So an argument can feel convincing because your mind quietly supplied a premise that makes it work. But that premise might be false. It might even be completely absurd. And if you never bring it into the open and never examine it, that falsehood may slip past you. So at this time, I would like to suggest the logic detective's rule. When you encounter an argument, ask yourself, is anything missing? Is there an unstated premise? Is there an unstated conclusion? If there is, bring it out into the light. Write it down. Make it explicit. Because then, and only then, can you evaluate the argument properly. A missing premise or conclusion often is the dog that did not bark. It may be the key to discovering that the argument you thought looked so good is in fact a crime against logic. This is why in the logic detective business, we avoid enthymemes the way that Lazy Larry avoids work. In everyday conversations, enthymemes are common. People do not always spell everything out. And that is fine until it is not fine. And you cannot know whether it is fine or not fine until you have thoroughly investigated the whole business. So in logic, we must aim for perfection. We must aim for perfect clarity. We therefore try to make every premise visible and every conclusion explicit. No hidden assumptions, no missing pieces, because in this business, the dog that did not bark might be the most important dog of all.